is the Adoptive Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. My name is Alex Fitton, and I have the incredible honor of hosting this podcast each and every week to bring encouragement and solidarity to us mamas in the trenches and our support systems. Today, I am going to be featuring a chat I had with Leah Burry. Leah was born and raised here in Northwest Arkansas, where I am located. She's the mom of two boys, Levi and Ryan, and she and her husband Tom have been married for 12 years. She is also an OT, that's occupational therapist, if you didn't know, OT assistant at Kids for the Future. And she's been doing that for 13 years. And most recently, she is an open foster home, specifically doing respite care for other foster families. So Leah and I got to talk about kids from hard places and their sensory needs and how those needs affect their behavior. We also talked about respite care and how she uses her knowledge on sensory behavior and occupational therapy to give much needed breaks to local foster families. She has also compiled a list of sensory needs identification techniques, whatever you want to call it, and a sensory gift guide on Amazon, which are both in the show notes. So be sure to check those out at theadoptivemompodcast.com. They're in the links and resources section. I'm really excited about this chat. We just had a really good conversation about, just some of the harder things we deal with as parents when we see these behaviors and we don't know what the heck is going on. Leah is so great, and she was able to say, well, this is going on in their heads and this is going on in their bodies, and this is how you can help. So it's a really practical episode, and I hope you guys love it like I do. Before we jump in, I want to remind you guys to rate and review. If you love this podcast and you think others would as well, that is the best way to let the podcast rise up in the ranks and be recommended to other adoptive parents or people searching for adoption resources. So please take a second and do that. I would really appreciate it. I think that is all. So let's jump into my conversation with Leah Burry. All right, guys. So I'm sitting here with Leah Burry, and once again, I do mean with her. This is time away from her kids, so this is basically vacation. But I'm so excited to be hanging out with a friend and chatting, and it's so much more fun to do it this way than over the phone. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself, Miss Leah Burry.
I am from Salem Springs, Arkansas. Born and raised, went off to Kansas City for college, and then came back to Northwest Arkansas to start my job as an occupational therapy assistant. And I live in Cave Springs. I have two boys, Levi and Ryan. They're ages 7 and 5.
You had to think about it.
Yes. And then husband Tom, we've been married 11 years.
He's doing mental math.
Yes.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, both of your kids are biological.
Yes.
But you guys are an open respite home, which we're going to talk about what exactly that is here in a second. But that's really cool. I feel like I always have to say up front whether or not you are an adoptive mom, since it's called, the Adoptive Mom Podcast. But you have a really unique specialty, which makes your wisdom super relevant for this podcast. And you guys as listeners might not know it yet, but Leah's already been involved with the podcast before, back when she provided our sensory gift guide in December of 2018 for the email list. And we did a giveaway. You had lots of great stuff on there. And that's kind of your specialty, right? You know a lot about sensory stuff. And I know you're gonna be really humble right now and be like, no, not at all. But you really do. You're really good at that kind of stuff. OT involves a lot of different things. But this seems like something that you feel pretty passionate about, right?
Yes, yes, exactly right. OT covers a whole lot of areas, different ages, different specialties. But I have been doing pediatric OT for since 2005. 5. And I've only worked with kids, and I really like the sensory side of occupational therapy. Just because it's a lot of problem solving, and it's just a really tangible way to help kids deal with their sensory needs.
So you guys have been doing respite care for a few months now, and I really want to hear, before we jump into all of your OT stuff and the work that you do there, what led your family to filling this really important gap in the foster care and adoptive system?
Okay, so like I said earlier, just the whole idea of being a full-time foster family was really intimidating to me, and my husband, Tom, didn't really feel like that was our calling. And so we really wanted to help out foster families. We just weren't sure how. And then I went on this really awesome mission trip to Africa, where I got to design a sensory room for these kids at an orphanage.
So cool.
And it was one of the best trips I've ever taken. And it was just a really awesome way of combining my passion for occupational therapy with children in need. And it was just a tangible way to bring those together and help. And I was like, this is what I want to do. This feels right. This is just right in line with my passions and gifts. And but it wasn't until maybe like a couple years after I took that trip where it became clear that respite was very similar. So we are a fully licensed foster home. So we could take foster kids at any time.
Yeah.
But we are really passionate about respite care. So basically, foster families need a break for various reasons. Either they're going out of town, they're going on a trip, or they just need a break emotionally. We can take their foster kids for an extended period of time and give the foster families a break. It has, so far, we opened in June, and so far we've been able to help 8 families through respite care. And a couple of those families we've been able to help multiple times and build a relationship with the foster families and help them, take the kids for a weekend or for, 5-6 days and to give them a break. It's just been really cool to come alongside these families and help in a tangible way like that.
Yeah. Well, and you said earlier with your mission trip that you were able to bridge, your two passions. Mm-hmm. And have you been able to do that with respite care? Have you been able to work with some of the kids in your home? Obviously not in a clinical way because they're just there to play and eat and,
right.
Eat up your capacity for the weekend or whatever. But are you able to work with them and then go to their foster moms and be like, hey, I think this might help, or, I have some ideas or anything like that too?
Yes. We have had a couple of children that have had some special needs. Like you said, it's not like a clinical setting, but just it's really funny. The way that I parent or the way that I'm a mom to these respite kids is like how I picture myself being a mom. Because I'm so much more gentler and kinder yes. with these kids, because I feel like I can come at it from the perspective of, their background is different, and I don't know, it's just coming at it from that OT perspective. Yeah, makes me, I don't know. I'm like, oh, that's the mom I should be to my children, but their foster moms probably don't feel like that. So it's great that you get to step in and help them. But another great thing about what you do is that while a lot of babysitters, they can help out and they can provide that relief, but they don't get it like you do. And I think that provides, that's such a unique perspective that you're able to provide, because you're like, I can give you relief. I'm not, I understand trauma disorders. I understand what you're going through. I can see this kid, but it's still, I'm not burned out yet. I'm right. Like, I haven't been around them. I can still work with them and understand your frustration, but not be frustrated. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Right. And I always try to come at it, gently, because I don't want to, I don't ever want the foster moms to think that I figured out their kid, or, you know, that I have,
that you can fix everything.
that I can fix everything. But one like specific example is there's a family that we've had their foster kids, 3, I think we're going to have them later this month. So almost four times. And, the older one is special needs. And every time that we've had them, I have seen growth in this child, and just developmentally, and something that she doesn't see in the everyday, because she's bogged down by his needs and his behaviors and all these other things. But to come at it from, you know, month to month, this kid is making great progress. And so being able to encourage her in that way has been good.
Yeah. And I love that you're able to provide that. So speaking of all of that, I think that it would be great to get into what your specialty is and to talk about, I don't know, some of these behaviors and what stems from them. And, or what they stem from. That's what I'm trying to say. You know, the wine talking. But okay, so first let's start at the beginning. So there's a lot of different sensory behaviors. I mean, if you're going to go polarized, right, what are the two like polar opposite sensory needs? There's like,
there's
like seeking, right?
Yes. So there's the under responsive. So those are like the kids that are seeking sensory input. And then there's the other end, which are they're sensory defensive.
Right.
So, okay, so your sensory system, you think of your 5 main senses, right? Sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing.
Yeah, that's 5. I had to count on my fingers like a child.
Yes, we learned this in preschool. But there are also other sensory.
Right. There's also I think 3 other senses, right? And you guys, I was like 27 years old when I learned about these 3 other senses, and that was 1 year ago.
It's okay. Most OTs will tell you there's 8 senses. So
he's right. There's 3.
Yes,
right?
There's 3 extra. But and these are big words. So, but
buckle up, guys.
Buckle up. It's about to get nerdy. Okay, so there's the vestibular system. And that basically is where your body is in space. Mm-hmm. So in your inner ear, you're really technical, the fluid in your inner ears helps control where you are in space. Mm-hmm. So when you move in a circle and you're spinning, it's your inner ear, the fluid in your inner ears that helps you recalibrate after you stop. Or that helps you aware of, oh my goodness, I'm spinning around in circles.
Like equilibrium, right?
Yeah. Yes. So that's vestibular sense. And then there's proprioception, which is there's tiny little sensory receptors in between each of your joints. And so basically proprioception is there to help you know where your body is in relation to everything else. So basically, when you sit down, you can close your eyes and say where every part of your body is. You know, my bottom's in the chair, my legs are crossed, my elbow's on the table, because of those receptors in your joints. And then the third one is interoception, which basically is the, inner feeling, knowing what you're feeling on the inside. So just your inner feeling of well-being, I think.
Okay, you're like so smart right now. I know some of these needs because I, experienced them with Rock, but I couldn't have told you what they were called for a lot of money, probably. So before we get into, how those present themselves, or, if they're in overdrive or the opposite of overdrive, and I know that you're not like a counselor, but what are some of the causes of having heightened or deafened senses? Is that the right word? Is that the clinical term for it?
Over-responsive or under-responsive.
Thank you. See, she's so smart. But okay, so what are some of the causes? We know that the general word would be trauma, but what are some of the, specific correlations that you've seen?
Well, I mean, there's no specific cause. Mm-hmm. I mean, people just there's no specific known cause. We tend to see it more in children that have been through some sort of trauma. So drugs in utero is a big one.
Hand raising.
We see it a lot with children with autism. And their sensory processing disorder is its own disorder. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, everybody has sensory issues.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like my food touching, I don't like my socks to be wrinkled. But
I can't handle lots of noises.
Exactly. But that doesn't interfere with our being able to carry out our lives.
Right. And the way I've always, the way that I've always had it compared to me, because as someone who is, neurotypical, I don't fully understand the depth of sensory needs. And I've had it explained to me like, when you breathe, you get enough air and you do what you need to do. If if you're getting shallow breaths, then all of a sudden you'll take a deep breath and that you just regulate that on your own.
Right.
But for people who have sensory needs, it's like taking really shallow breaths and not quite knowing how to take that deep breath or not feeling like you can regulate that on your own. And so you just feel like you're going without. So, I mean, drugs in utero, I've heard that from so many people, or fetal alcohol syndrome, or just any kind of physical trauma, especially physical abuse or neglect can be a big one, right?
Yes, neglect is.
So I didn't realize that you guys don't see any common correlation between a type of abuse and a sensory need. I didn't realize that.
I mean, it really depends, case to case. Neglect, we would see a lot of just very under-responsive. So they kind of appear like a bump on a log. They're just, they need that sensory input, but they don't actively seek it out, basically because they don't know how. Or with neglect, you could see kids who are very defensive, that don't want to be touched, that are very, that are on the other end of the continuum. So it really depends on the kid and we try really hard not to treat the diagnosis, but to treat the child. So every kid is a case by case, like what are they presenting? What behaviors do they exhibit? And then we go from there. Okay, so they're running into walls. Okay, then we take our steps back and be like, why are they running into walls? Is it something that they're seeking?
Yeah.
And then we just kind of go from there. It's all problem solving. And
so what do you think is the toughest situation I know you want to stay away from that word diagnose, but I just mean, what is the toughest situation to figure out? What have you seen as the most stressful situation for a parent?
I would say, the most frustrating, one that is very frustrating are the kids that can't stay still. Because as a mom myself, I know when you're going out into public, you just want your children to be still and to stay in the cart and not grab things. And that's hard for a neurotypical child to do.
Not touch each other.
And not touch or breathe each other's air or look in their direction. So it's hard for neurotypical children. But then you put in a kid that, their brain chemistry is off and they're heightened by everything that's going around. And it's just stressful for me because it's a hard one to treat. And it's so frustrating for the parents because you just see, you just have those feelings of everybody's looking at me and everybody's thinking, why don't they do something with their child that's running around Walmart?
Yeah.
Or can I say Walmart?
Absolutely. I mean, that's like shopping local here, right?
Yes.
We live in Northwest Arkansas, which is where Walmart headquarters is, biggest retailer in the world. But anyway, so, okay, let's go like real deep here. So this is a practical episode and I'm really excited about this because it's going to give us some just practical help about our kids that we see these behaviors every day and they infuriate us all. And so let's talk about each of these things. So when, you name those 3 extra senses or you have a kid that is sensory seeking, what are some of the things that parents are going to see and notice about each of these?
Okay.
I don't care what order you go in.
Okay. So basically it's like a continuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Woo! Wine glass. And it's really hard to. So
She's
basically,
miming. That's why she's struggling here. She's trying to show you guys.
I'm using my hand motion. Okay, so basically, it's a really long continuum, and the majority of us are in the middle. We can regulate. We know how to deal with senses that are coming in. So on the far right side, we'll say, are our over-responsive children. So they have big responses to incoming sensory information. So they're very defensive. These are the kids that are picky eaters. These are the kids that cover their ears when there's really loud noise. These are the kids that don't like clothes tags, sock seams,
tight hugs.
Yes, exactly. And these are the kids that need calming activities. These are the kids that need the deep pressure, that need the bean bags, the noise-canceling headphones, the weighted lap pads. And side note, be very, very careful when you're using weighted blankets.
Okay.
When your children sleep.
Ooh.
Especially if they're under the age of 2.
Okay. So my son's 3 and has a weighted blanket on him like right now. So
Go take it right now.
Do I need to go pause this?
Pause. Young children should have no more than 10% of their body weight added on them while they're sleeping. And then for any child under 2, I would say don't use it while they're sleeping. And that just goes along with the weighted blanket is supposed to calm you. It's supposed to, which also can decrease your body's reaction to something dangerous.
Yeah.
So if they were to, I don't want to go into this. Just don't use them on kids under the age of 2.
Good to know. Noted.
Yes.
Everyone write that down. Okay. So that's for like kids who are, and I've already forgotten the words, Leah, like they don't want senses, right?
Right. So they're over responsive.
There you go.
So, you think about something like the hum of the computer screen. Like you and I can hear it if we stop and listen. But a child that was over responsive, it could be driving them crazy.
So if you have a kid that is maybe opposed to these things, they have a tag on their shirt that's driving them insane, but they don't know how to tell you because they have other trauma issues. What are some of the behaviors that you might see that are like a cry for help from a kid?
Pulling at their clothes. They don't want to get dressed in the morning because they know that something that's harmful to them is coming. And you'll probably see it across the board. It probably won't just be one thing. It will probably be a combination of things that they over respond to.
Okay. These are good. Yeah, good to know. So, and which fancy word would that one adhere to? Or would it adhere to all of them? The inside the body, the outside of the body?
Oh,
parts?
the like senses?
Yeah. Or would it kind of be a mixture of all of them?
Yeah, because
Okay.
it's coming from outside. It usually, since it has to do with touch and sound, it's really just some of the main ones.
See, that's so fascinating to me because I feel like, I'm just, my go-to is rock because that's my I mean, that's my everyday. So he seems to really struggle with the first two you said. I don't know about the inside of his body, although he can seem to tell me when his head hurts or his belly hurts. But yeah, like when I say take your pants off, that, I mean, just meltdown city. Like he can't figure out how to get his pants down and he doesn't seem to understand. I'm like, pull it off your ankle, your heel. And he's like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. And so, yeah, this is like piquing my interest. So what about moving on along the continuum? What's next?
Okay. So on the other side, so we talked about over responsive. So now going on the other side is the under responsive. So there's little or no reaction to incoming info. And so because they're under responsive, they kind of fit into two categories. They are sensory seekers. And then there are the sensory. They're not avoiding, they're just passive about it.
Because they can't feel it.
Right. So they're just kind of like meh. So the sensory seekers, and this you'll include in the notes.
Yeah, the show notes. Yeah, I'll have all of this in there, and
it'll break it all down nicely for you.
There's like a sweet chart.
So the sensory seekers, these are the ones that everybody thinks of. Okay, these are the ones that are craving sensory input because their body is so under responsive to the information coming in. They're constantly seeking it out. These are the kids that do the hand flapping. These are the kids that do the spinning. These are the kids that are running just constantly in motion, that can't sit still in their seats.
Run into walls.
Lots of boys fit into this category. Run into walls, jump off of, really, really high surfaces. They have a very, very high threshold for sensory input. These are the kids that could spin constantly on like a merry-go-round or a swing and get off and go the next thing. Like it doesn't faze them.
Yeah.
So they're just constantly, it's like if you were constantly hungry and you were constantly looking for something to eat and you were never satisfied. That's like these kids. They're constantly looking for sensory information and they're never satisfied. So these are the kids that need organized, stimulating activities. So it's going to sound counterintuitive, but the kid that's constantly moving, that's what they're seeking. That's what they need. They need the constant movement. They need to be spun and spun and spun and spun. They're the ones that need to go on the swing and go as high as you can push them. But it has to be organized. So you have to be able to put the increased activity with like a gross motor movement.
Which is?
Or like an upper body strengthening. So, something that helps them organize after they've hit the threshold. Otherwise, they won't be able to release the appropriate brain chemicals.
Yeah.
It sounds opposite. Like when you see a kid running around, you think, oh, I need to get them to calm down. So sit still and, do this puzzle or lay under this weighted blanket, which is fine. But before that, then they would need, they need some sort of activity first and then.
Yeah. But something that's, I guess, kind of a side note is, you're talking about they don't feel a lot of the incoming senses, and that can include pain, right? So a lot of these kids, it's almost dangerous because they could, say, get a concussion and might not even notice, or, they might notice the like feeling dizzy maybe, but not even that. So it can be a little bit, what are some of the signs you can notice? Besides bruises, but when these kids hurt themselves or they have these extra needs that we just don't understand or can't see, what are we looking for?
These are your wild and crazy kids. Okay. These are the kids that just seem so out of control. So basically if a kid like this was to walk into a therapy session, I would, put him on the swing, and we would swing for, an allotted amount of time. And then we would go and climb the rock wall. So it's giving that activity that they're seeking, so the movement of the swing, and then they're having to do the heavy lifting and the heavy weight and the gross motor of the rock wall. And then maybe I would take them and we would do the slide, a couple times, and then we do some floor work. So on your belly and propped up on your elbows, we do something in there. And then I would take them to the table to try to get something out of them, developmental wise.
And I know for Rock, they use those activities as rewards for his OT sessions. So if he can sit and do his cutting and his, drawing straight lines, then he gets to play with the beans and rice.
Right.
Or whatever, which apparently there are just all kinds of tantrums when you try to pull him away from the beans and rice.
It's fun, man.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have, and you said the other one they're passive.
So the sensory passive. So they are also under responsive, but they're not, they could care less to seek it out. So these are the kids that will seem like a bump on a log. So they're just kind of sluggish. They're usually overweight. They just don't feel it coming in, and they don't want to do anything about it.
Okay. So, this is shifting gears, but talk to us about, so there's there's probably a clinical term for this, but I'm going to call it a sensory meltdown, which is very different than a regular meltdown. So yes. How does a parent tell the difference? Because I know for me, and I'll just give you from experience, when Rock is throwing a sensory tantrum, he will can move his body around in this weird, he'll shrug his shoulders, and you can't see me right now, but I'm kind of doing it. He'll move his arms, and it's it's really weird. It's like a slow convulsion. It's not quick, but I'm okay, you need some input here. So is that something that's pretty common?
I mean, it varies between children. Okay. And I get we in this profession get the question a lot. Is it sensory or is it behavior? Is the child doing this because they're being manipulative and they want to get something? Or are they doing this because they truly have a sensory need? And the answer is it's both. It may start out as a behavior that progresses into a sensory meltdown, or it may start as a sensory thing and then just becomes this full-blown behavior meltdown. And so I would say to just always, if you have a kid that has sensory needs, and even if you don't, I've done this with my own, children, just if you come at it from a sensory standpoint, I feel like there's a level of grace and maybe a level of understanding where it's not just me trying to conform my child to this behavior, but, okay, what is going on here? What is my child struggling with? If you had an infant, okay, and they were hungry. So when infants are hungry, they start to cry because they haven't learned how to, regulate, and they can't take care of their own needs. You wouldn't take that the infant and say, "Stop crying right now. I have to go and make a bottle and be right back." Just like if you had a 3-year-old that's in the middle of a tantrum, standing there telling them to calm down is not accomplishing anything. So, and it's hard, and I know it's hard. In the heat of the moment, you're in the middle of the store, or you're at your in-laws, and your child is wreaking havoc, and you just want to be like, ugh.
Just want to say, stop. That's good. Just stop.
Just please stop. Stop doing what you're doing. Or, even more serious, if there was somebody that was deaf, you wouldn't tell them to listen harder.
Right.
If there was somebody, that was blind, you wouldn't say, just try to see.
But
And
that
it's
really
very
gives it
similar to if you have a child that cannot regulate the sensory information that's coming to them, then it's very similar.
Okay, I hope you are absolutely loving my conversation with Leah Burry. She's so great, and we'll get back to her in just a second. First, I wanted to remind you guys about our new Facebook group, the Adoptive Mom Community. It's really fun. We have just all kinds of resources and support in there, and it's such a great community of women supporting each other. And it's not just for adoptive moms, it's also for support systems and birth moms and people hoping to adopt. But it's all just people who can surround around the podcast and chat about it and lean on those resources and lean on each other. So be sure to go to theadoptivemompodcast.com. You'll find links to join there, or you can just search for the Adoptive Mom Community on Facebook. Also, if you haven't signed up yet, be sure to sign up for emails. They go out every Monday morning. I don't blow up your email, but it has the links to the podcast in all its various listening forms right to your inbox with a note from me and a little bit of the show notes included as well. It's just a really great resource, and I want to make sure you're on that list because I do giveaways quite often in there. So go to theadoptivemompodcast.com/email. And that is it. Back to the show.
So are you able to talk to us about what that's doing in their brains at all? Or is that something that like a psychiatrist would have to explain? Like, and we were talking about neurochemicals, and we know that trauma actually rewires a child's brain. Mm-hmm. So what is happening on a neuro level when they're not getting input, or they're getting too much input, or just whatever? What's causing them to have these sensory meltdowns? And maybe, because I know that for me, whenever I understand it that way, it helps me to see them with different eyes, not so much as they're throwing a fit because they're 3, and more looking at it and saying he's throwing a fit because his body feels like it's, on fire or whatever.
Right. Well, and 3-year-olds do throw fits.
Right.
I mean, it is developmentally appropriate for a 3-year-old to throw a fit.
That doesn't make me feel good at all.
So suck it up. And no, it is all about the brain and neurochemicals and the right ones being released at the right time. And if you have a child that was exposed to drugs or, exposed to anything in utero, stroke or any of the various things that can happen, not just trauma, their brains don't work the way that they're supposed to, and the right chemicals are not firing when they're supposed to. And so if you can figure out the right activities to do for your kids, it can help your brain, fire the right chemicals.
Tell your body to calm down, or tell you.
Yes, exactly. From an approach that I feel is way more productive and helpful than everybody getting moms and children throwing fits.
That never happens. Okay, and this is totally, this question just popped into my mind, but where would rhythmic movement, which one of those would it fit into?
Okay.
Because for instance, my child, to go to sleep, he bangs his head on his pillow. Mm-hmm. I'm not worried about it because it's on a pillow, but it's like, and he kind of hums to himself while he does it. Where does that fall in?
So rhythmic movements,
rocking, that would be another example,
yes,
right?
Addressing rhythmic movements address reflexes. So basically, when you're born, you have certain reflexes that haven't integrated themselves into your system yet. If you have drugs or alcohol in your system, it can help. It can delay that integration.
That's fascinating.
Our bodies are created so specifically to work where it all works together, and we know that. But it's just amazing to me that when one thing gets off, it can just throw everything out of whack.
Yeah.
So the rhythmic movements can help a child with the reflexes that have or have not been integrated. So these are the questions that you should definitely ask your OT.
Well, and on that note, I wanted to ask, so if you're speaking to a mom who has a kid that falls on any point in the spectrum, but maybe getting services for them feels really intimidating, or maybe they adopted them from another country and so they don't even know where to start, and they're from a very neurotypical family. I mean, that was me. Like, I was like, what is OT? I don't understand. What are the questions that you ask? How do you get your kid tested or evaluated or anything? Like, where do you start? And what would you say to look for? Like, if you're seeing these things, call and tell them this. I just know that it can be really intimidating for someone who's completely out of their element there.
Right. And the verb, and knowing the right verbiage. And
right.
So like I said before, everybody has their sensory quirks. And that's not what we're talking about, in particular. These are the kids where it interferes with, their daily lives. They can't get past something because of whatever it is that they're feeling. And even if you're not sure, it doesn't hurt to ask. But start with your PCP. So start with your pediatrician. Say, hey, I've been noticing these things. I'm wondering if maybe they have some sensory issues. And then from your pediatrician, you should be able to get a referral to get an OT evaluation.
Mm-hmm. And the evaluation is usually free, correct? Or it's
clinic by clinic.
Right. But it's usually not difficult to get in, just to get an evaluation.
Right.
Right. And then you can go from there. But in my experience, any Pete's therapist is going to be super awesome to work with, and they really do love kids. And before we get to these closing questions, I wanted to ask you, Leah, about some really, treating a kid who has sensory issues is never going to be like a short road. It's always going to be a long journey, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It's just not going to be a quick fix. But there are some things that can help alleviate some immediate, like a sensory meltdown or something like that. What are some of those things? I know that, when we did your sensory gift guide around Christmas time, you had a lot of toys on there, but it can be as simple as, making a sensory board or having a sensory table or manually regulating, which is something I have to do to Rock every day. So talk to us about some of those. I don't want to use the word quick fixes, but they can help diffuse a situation.
Right. And it's going to be case by case. And I would start with you know your children. You know what sets them off, because those are the things that you try to avoid every day. And then you know what doesn't work. Because these are the hardest parts of our day, right? And so, it really depends on where they fall on the whole continuum. But generally speaking, and this is very general, if you have a kid that's throwing a meltdown, they're either going to want to be hugged and held, that deep pressure input, or they want to be left alone. So that's a really great place to start. Do they want me to come in and wrap them up in a big bear hug, or do they want me to give them space? And so that's a good way to start, just start from there.
Yeah.
And it really depends on if your child is verbal, if they can express what they want. If you have a child that's not verbal, then, that just adds a whole nother level.
What are a couple of your favorite sensory toys?
Let's see. What do I use every day? Obviously swings. I really, there's swinging.
Yeah. And y'all swinging pod chairs are like $25 on Amazon. Rock got one for Christmas.
Does yours hang in the doorway?
It hangs from the ceiling.
Yeah. Yes. If you can get a swing in your house, especially if you have a sensory seeker, and if you get one of the ones that's kind of like a pod or made out of that like spandex material, that can be really good for calming, whether they swing in it or not, just to have that enclosure.
Yeah, because it cuts out hearing sense, and it's like a tunnel vision, because when you sit in it, it pulls the field of the field of view to like this tiny little oval.
Mm-hmm. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what are
so swing. So those really large yoga balls are really good for children that need calming activities. Bouncing on them, rolling over them, having your child lay on the floor and taking the large yoga ball and rolling it over them and putting a little bit of pressure, not too much, can be really good. And honestly, I really like fidget toys. I like the things that they can just hold in their hand that's not, going to get in anybody's way, that they can kind of fidget with, and then we'll do a little bit of, coloring, and then we'll play with the toy, and then we'll do some blocks, and so.
And you can, we're going to provide the sensory guide, or some of the, what am I trying to say? Leah actually created an Amazon wish list that has a lot of these toys on there, and I'll provide the link for that. We shared it back in December, but if you sign up for my email list, then I'll go ahead and send you that as well with a lot of these really awesome things. Another favorite that I've heard from school-age kids is the band that stretches on their chairs so they can play with it with their feet, and it does help them sit still. Is that one on there? I can't remember.
It wasn't, but that's a really good one for school-age children. And it doesn't have to be anything special. It could be like those, the bands that you can get just like on the exercise equipment aisle at the store. And you just wrap them around the front of the chair and the chair legs.
Yeah. So cool. See, this is like super fascinating to me, especially now that I have a sensory seeking kid, because that's what Rock is. It's really interesting to me to hear all of these things that, I don't know, it opens up a whole new world, because like I said before, as a neurotypical kid, I didn't need a lot of this stuff, but now I'm like, give me all the sensory toys, teach me how to I'm doing like foot massages on my 3-year-old, because I'm like, please calm down. And a lot of that is thanks to Leah. She's just being such a specialist in this area. I think, I don't know, it enables you to help people in a way that they didn't even know they needed, which is so cool. Okay, so I want to get into some of these closing questions. So,
well, I was going to say, along with the notes, there's also a little chart that kind of breaks down, okay, if your kid needs calming activities, and then it gives like a list of ideas that you can use. If your child needs alerting activities, it gives examples of those.
That's super helpful. I'm looking at it right now. That's really interesting. Did you create that?
Yes.
Wow. I told you guys. She's like so smart. Okay. So, closing questions. So, what do you wish everyone knew about your job specifically, and in particular a sensory specialist area?
You're being very generous with the specialist word. I'm not a specialist.
Just for the job you
experience.
Want.
It changed to the clock. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. What do I wish everyone knew about OT?
Or just what your this focus of sensory OT stuff.
It's going to take a while. It's not a short road. It's not going to be an easy road. There's going to be a lot of trial and error, but this stuff works. If you can get the right stuff for your kid, it can make huge, huge differences.
Okay. So, and then next would be, what is a common mistake that you see? So something that you wish you had done differently in the beginning, maybe a common mistake you made in the beginning, and something that you see parents doing. And this is not to shame anyone. It's just, like if you could go back and be like, let's rewind, just fix this one little thing.
Over talking.
Ooh, that's a good one. And so you kept it short and sweet.
Yeah. I mean, it's... If your kid is in the middle of a meltdown, they don't want to hear you rationalize. They don't want to hear you talk about how terrible they're behaving, and they don't care, basically. So just if you can figure out the sensory thing that they need, you can save the talking and the encouraging for after the meltdown is over, and then come alongside them and say, I love you and I care about you. And that's when the words mean the most.
Well, and you have told me before that there are specific 2-word phrases that you can use in moments like that, like try again or with respect or listen and obey, right? And
yeah, that's not OT.
Right, but that can help in those situations.
Yes.
It's short and sweet, 2 words. And if you need to speak and not just provide the sensory need. My question is usually, what is your favorite adoption resource? But I want to tailor that to obviously what we're talking about. So what's your favorite resource to learn about the sensory needs of our kids, especially these 3 extra senses that are just not that known, but I feel like any kid with trauma is going to struggle with at least one.
Right. Your friendly neighborhood occupational therapist. That's my favorite resource. Well, and I think knowing the verbiage and knowing what to look for, if you were to go to the internet and put in sensory processing, you would get completely overwhelmed. I would get completely overwhelmed with all the information. But if you were to go and search using the right verbiage, you could come up with something that's more specific to what you're looking for. So, hey, I want to know more about vestibular input.
Yeah.
You could.
That's the fancy scientific term.
Yes, yes.
Vestibular, input. I love it. Okay. So what is your, lastly, if you could sum it all up, what's your biggest piece of advice or encouragement to adoptive or foster families who are seeing these behaviors and are like going insane?
Ask for help.
Ooh, yeah. Simple but good. I think another, this just came to me, and maybe I should have brought it up earlier, but I think there's a lot of like, well, this stuff didn't exist 20 years ago, so it can't be valid. But, I'm sitting here like, how many sensory seeking kids are walking around as adults now and they just were never taught or they were never dealt with? And I think that it's really cool how we have all this new information now and we're learning what to do with it. And I feel like even me, sometimes it's afraid. I'm like, am I enabling him or am I, doing something like that?
Just giving in to what he's right.
But I don't know that that's possible. The more I learn about it, like there's no harm in giving a kid an opportunity to play in beans and rice,
Right.
It's not going to hurt. It's not going to enable. And I think that it's just really cool how much this field is growing, because I know that it's the newest, field
Allied
of
health.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't know what the phrasing would be, but it's the newest like therapy service that you can regularly get for pediatrics, especially. So it's just really neat. I'm so excited that you were able to take the time to sit down with us and give us some practical help on some issues that I use the word plague, but I just mean that in the sense of like, these are the kinds of things that make us want to pull our hair out. And if we have the right tools, it doesn't have to be so scary or intimidating. And so it's really cool that there are people like you in the world who think that sensory stuff is fascinating and want to learn about it. So then you can share your knowledge with us. And I'm going to plug the Adopted Mom community, because if you're in there, Leah is too, and you can tag her and have fairly immediate access to all of her wisdom. But where else can they find you?
Okay. Yes, going off the don't be afraid to ask for help. Please, please, please feel free to reach out to me through Facebook, Leah Burry. That's probably the best way.
Yeah.
Just message me and be like, oh, hey, I have this question. And I would love, love, love to help.
Yeah, she's super cool. And I'll link to all of her stuff in the show notes too. But until then, thanks so much, Leah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I hope you found encouragement here. I need you to know that you are enough and you're doing a great job. We are all in this together, and I am over here cheering you on. Don't forget to check out show notes for this episode and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks for joining us.